In this video, one of the last things we need to do is to add a section for our story. Let's zoom into the lower right-hand corner. This area is really meant to be a part that tells the story of the owner of this restaurant. And they've given you a picture which will go here, and they've given you a little area that tells about who he is and why he started this particular restaurant, The Grill. Now, in order to make this stand out, let's give it a little bit of a background that contrasts with the blue, but also mixes in with the colors that we're working on. In order to work on the background of it, let's go to our Layers panel, go to the very bottom, and let's choose the Fill Color layer on top of here. What we want to do is we want to select just this area and fill it in with a solid color. So with the fill color of blue or whatever color you chose, let's make a new one on top of it, and let's call this Our Story Color. Rather than using just a solid fill color layer, we're going to just fill it in with a selected area. Choose your rectangular marquee tool. With the rectangular marquee tool selected, you can click and drag over this area. Now, if you want, you can go all the way to the edge, or you can just keep it within the guidelines or the column structure. Don't forget, you can also hold down the space bar and move things around. The main thing is we want to make sure everything is nice and well balanced for what we've got. If necessary, you may need to back up just so you can see it. Now, with everything selected, let's fill that in with a solid color. We can go up to Edit, down to Fill. This will allow us to choose a specific color. So change your content to be color. And then from here, we can pick the colors that we've been working on. Hey, another great way to find colors that we've already got without ever having to type these in to down here is to use your eyedropper tool. With the color picker selected, if you zoom in and move your cursor around, you can click on an area and it automatically picks up that color. So if I wanted that particular color of orange, I can get it. Or if I clicked down here, it may be really small and slight, but I can pick up on just that particular color of yellow. I like this orange, so I'm going to keep it for this one. And we'll say OK to this. Then when we say OK to the fill, it automatically fills in that entire area. Now we're not done yet. We can always go up to Select and deselect our outline area. Because we're working on its own layer, we can do things like play around with our blending modes. Rather than keeping it at a normal blending mode, let's drag it over so we can see it. Setting it to something like, multiply will make it darker, screen will certainly make it lighter, overlay, soft light, hard light will give it some different results. I particularly like to work with either color or hue sometimes to pick up that particular color. It doesn't have to match it 100% perfectly. It just needs to be different enough to stand out. So play around with different colors and different color layouts to give yourself a different kind of vibe. Just playing around with this, I can see that either linear light gives me a really good feel, vivid light and hard light. I even like the look of difference, and I think that's a great one to work through. Finally, remember when you're playing around with the color mode, you can also play around with the opacity of it to knock it down just a bit if you think it's a bit too strong. With this done, I'll put my layers back down here. Let's do some more simple editing inside of this area to make the story stand out. First of all, our story needs to be consistent with everything else. We could keep it the same font that we did with the others, or we could find another font, but I think this font works well for mine. I am going to make mine a little bit bigger just to make it stand out and nudge it up. As far as the color of the body copy goes, you can grab your type tool. We can do Command A to select all of the type. And then we can also change the color of that type up here at the top to match whatever other color we want. If we made it yellow, you can see yellow doesn't stand out until we make it a very, very bright yellow. I think I'm going to keep it as a nice bright yellow just so it's readable for this. Let's do the same thing for thegrill.com. Select it. And then I can either click right on the yellow that I want to pick it up. And then let's choose a font that's also nice and bold for the grill. Now it's really standing out and works well. In this section, we want to add the photograph of the founder, Major Harold Whitmore. Let's go up to File, and if you haven't done so already, we can save our document, and then we can go to File and Open. Going back to our restaurant project resources, let's choose the Vintage Photograph JPEG and open it up as its own separate document. You can see this is an older photograph that's got some tears to it. The coloring is really bad. It really needs to be fixed up and looking nice. So let's take this one thing at a time and use some of the tools that we've been practicing for this unit. One of the first things that we can do to this is to get rid of the orange overtones and to give it a good dynamic range of lights and darks. The easiest way to do this is in the Adjustments panel. And with these adjustments, there's a lot of different things we can add to it. But using just the curves will get us most of the way there. When you select curves, remember it's going to add a curves adjustment layer to your layers panel, and the properties panel is going to pop up. I'm going to drag the properties off so we can see it. What we want to do with the curves properties is establish the lightest point and the darkest point. By clicking on the white eyedropper, the lightest point on someone's portrait is typically the tip of the nose. So if I was to click on the tip of the nose, that should automatically make it nice and bright and white. And you can see now it has a good tonal range to its start. Some of the colors have even fixed themselves, although you can look at the outside edges and see that they're really bright blue. We'll deal with that in just a second too. To get the dark points, click on the black eyedropper tool, and a dark shadow right under here under his shoulder is where we can click to give it that tonal range. Now check out what we've got. He's got a great tonal range of darks and lights that really make his portrait pop up. And all we had to do was adjust that slightly using the curves. I'm going to put my properties panel back over here. The colors on this still don't seem 100% authentic. They still have kind of an orangey or yellowy overtone, and the edges are completely blue. To turn this into a completely black and white image, let's once again return to our adjustments layer and click on black and white. Automatically, with one click, this turns it into a black and white image. It takes out all of the colors, and if necessary, I can adjust those inside of the sliders within here. But to be honest, I wouldn't do that. Maybe just adjusting it slightly to make the face pop up on the yellows, but nothing much needs to be done. You can see how it adds those layers to your design. At any time, if you don't like the results or you want to get rid of it, you can either turn off the visibility or you can erase away the layer altogether. Cracks that are in the side of this design. Go into our layers panel. We want to be able to flatten this down so that we're dealing with just one layer. So we're going to commit to all the changes and adjustments we've made. If you go to the layers options, let's choose flatten image, and that'll bring everything down to one background layer. This will make it easier to select everything. Next, let's zoom in, and let's take these cracks one at a time. Some are going to be easier than others, but the main ones to deal with that are going to be the most important are the ones that are going across his face. The best tool to get rid of cracks is going to be your Spot Healing Brush tool. With this tool selected, make sure that the size of this brush is a little bit bigger than the area we're trying to cover. So I'm going to make mine just a tiny bit bigger than 19, maybe about 24, 25 pixels. That looks pretty good. With this, make sure we're working in normal mode. Content aware is pretty good, and we've only got one layer, so we're not going to sample all of them. You can click and drag over the line and paint over it. And when you let go, you can see how it's going to try to find the most appropriate pixels around that area. Again, take this little by little, don't have to do the entire thing all at once, and make sure that it's appropriately getting rid of the line. Again, move from the outside in until the entire line is nice and gone. If you find that there is a problem with an area, simply undo it by going to Edit and Undo and do it again, or continue working over that area. Once it gets down to the eye, however, slow down and make sure this looks correct. You can see how it's off by just a bit, so I'm going to Edit and Undo. I'm going to skip over this part and see if we can come back to it a little bit later. So click and drag for the lips. That did a fantastic job. And then continue down from here. Notice that I'm not trying to do all of this all at once. I'm just trying to get it to fill in something that's appropriate. You can see how it's off by a little bit there, so I'm going to undo this one. Again, let's work from the outside inward, going back over any parts that may be misdone. Now it's starting to look a lot better. If it's off by a little bit, that's okay. As long as it looks convincing in the end, that's what we're really looking for. If yours does have some small little defects or details that are missing, we can always go back and work through those. Now that I've got the majority of that crack completely done and finished, let's see if we can work on the eyeball. Again, when doing this kind of work, it's helpful to zoom in on it and always adjust the size of your brush so that it doesn't paint more than is necessary. Going over the eye, that did a really good job of picking up on this one. Just a little bit of a smudge, but that once you zoom back out, I can live with that one. Also, with this brush still selected, we can go through and try to find any other little blemishes that are on the outside that could easily be erased and gotten rid of. There's a large tear that's over here. If I was to paint over that entire area and do a good job of it, it does a pretty good job of erasing it as well too. Now, other large areas like the outsides of these corners, let's use some content aware to be able to fill in those portions. To do that, let's go up and get our rectangle marquee, and I'm simply going to click and drag from the outside to select just this top corner right here. We can use the generative fill with one click here, and don't put anything for the options. We can hit generate and let it look around the area to fill it in with what it thinks is appropriate. This will take just a few seconds depending on the speed of your computer, but once it's finished we should have 3 or so options in the properties panel. All right, with that done, I can see I've got this one, or this one as an option. This middle one seems to fit the tones really, really well. Deselecting it, I think I'll commit to that one. Do make sure that your background layer is selected whenever you do this. Let's do the same for this other side. Again, generate the fill and click generate. Wait just a few moments and let's see what the computer thinks is appropriate. Not too bad. If anything, first option seems to be the best option. Finally, let's do the same thing for down at the bottom in this corner. You don't want to select anything that's not necessarily needs to be gotten rid of. Again, generative fill and generate. Not bad, I can live with that. And finally, let's do the same down here too. Select it, generative fill, and generate that area. Kind of funny, it thinks that's appropriate for it. I like this third option. All right. With this done, we can continue working through and getting rid of as many little blemishes or older areas as you think is necessary. But once you've reached a good stopping point, the last thing we need to do is return to our layers panel, go to the options and tell it to flatten the image back down one more time. This will give us one solid background, which is what we need to be able to go to File and save up this new vintage photo. With it finished, we can close it out. And let's drag in this vintage photo. Rather than going to File and Place Embedded, another way you can place an image is by finding the actual file itself on your Finder and then dragging it onto the document. Once it's on the document, it acts just like placing, and I can go and I can resize it to fill the area appropriately. I think that looks pretty good and fits nicely in there. Let's zoom back out so we can see our entire layout and our design. This is looking fantastic. You can see with this project how using some of the basic tools and getting a good understanding of how they apply to design, you can create some really dynamic work within Photoshop. And remember, this is completely customizable. Changing up things like the background color and the texture, changing up fonts and their colors and the designs, how their backgrounds of each of the titles can be changed, even how you cut out and arrange all of your images can come in handy for changing up the style of this design. So keep playing around with it. When you're ready, go up to File and down to Save one last time. You're going to turn in this Photoshop file with all of its layers into the classroom page.